This is Lightning Power Lunch, presented by Reif Rum on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
Well, we made the playoffs, and that's it. I mean, you don't win the Stanley Cup in the regular season, but to have a chance to win the Stanley Cup, you have to get through it. And I thought this group was, I don't know what we ended up in injury man games, but we got to be top 3, right, in the league. Yeah, I don't know. So, and I just think we grew as a group, and I thought they did a hell of a job. You told me, 50 wins to me, that's a big number. And for them to pull through and get that, and especially in the division and the conference we were in, which was elite. I don't know if I've seen a conference as competitive as this was from top to bottom. Proud of them. But now it's, what'd you say? Who said turn the page? Did I say that earlier? Anyway, that's what we have to do. We have to, now it's the second season, and this takes a whole new wave of commitment and determination and everything that goes in it. So looking forward to it, though. This is a fun time of year.
Was he referencing takes a lot of determination to do a radio show throughout an 82-game regular season? I think so, Coop. I got to tell you, forget about playing. That game was tough to watch, but how about covering it? My goodness. But you know what? This is the best time of the year. This is why, partner, we do this show. Yes, we love to talk hockey throughout. There are great storylines, a lot of adversity. But honestly, you can't win the big thing unless you're competing in it. And that's going to start at some point this weekend. And now this becomes fun. This becomes really impactful where you and I can sit here. We can talk about matchups. We can talk about how nasty the series has turned. Unsung heroes. We'll talk to different analysts from various networks to come on our show. We're going to have it all for you, and it really begins today, I think, for us getting set for Tampa Bay and Montreal, which really has the makings not only to be super impactful because of the players involved. There's going to be a lot of skill. I think there's going to be a nastiness to this series. I believe that. Mm-hmm. And then you always have the Montreal dynamic, the Canadian dynamic to this. And I just think it's going to be a really fun series to talk about.
Yeah, well, we've got 2 weeks, at most 2 weeks. And, I think for the Lightning, they are looking at this playoff year as, yes, we have an opportunity to win the Stanley Cup, but even short term, I'll just say it right now. I don't think I'm saying anything out of line or out of turn. A 4th straight first-round elimination would be a huge disappointment, particularly after the year they've had. It was a disappointment after the year they had last year. I think 2 years ago, Julian was able to examine the team and say, okay, we definitely need to make some changes, make some improvements, and those are really centered around 5-on-5 play and defensive play. But they have been an outstanding 5-on-5 team the last 2 years. They've been an outstanding defensive team the last 2 years. We're talking, among the top defensive teams in the NHL, among the top 5-on-5 teams in the NHL last year and this year. That's why I think last year's loss to Florida was so disappointing, because they didn't meet the moment, right? And they faced a very good team. They're going to face a very good team again this year. But for the Lightning to lose again in the first round based on how they've played this year, when you look at their final numbers, they're among the best in the NHL in a variety of categories that are usually very important categories, if not bellwether categories. So we'll see what happens. I'm going to back it up, though. This is a really tough opponent they've got. But they would have had a tough opponent regardless. They would have had a tough opponent in Boston. They would have had a tough opponent in Ottawa, which tends to play the Lightning really well. And they certainly would have had a tough opponent in Buffalo. Those were their potential opponents. They got Montreal. Montreal poses a challenge. The Suzuki line poses a challenge. Lane Hudson poses a challenge. Playing well in that building where momentum can be like a tidal wave coming against you, that is a challenge. But what we saw from the Lightning over the course of 82 games tells you that they are capable of winning the series. I'm not going to jump ahead and say, like, what's going to happen, win or lose. I'm just saying, I think going into this playoff year, based on the year that they've had, based on what's happened the last 3 years, that they really want to get out of the first round. I think that is, if not it's explicitly stated, it's implicitly, understood from the coaches to the players.
Yeah,
everybody.
It's a good point, because I think in addition to the topic regarding how this team has finished the year, and really since the Winter Olympic break, and if that carries into the playoffs or if it doesn't, outside of that topic, because that's a big one, I do think another topic for me that's a little bit like we need to play a 60-minute game, that kind of narrative, is experience. And how much does experience matter? And so Brian brought up an interesting point last night when we were debating it a little bit, and he said, well, it depends on what type of experience you have. If it's all bad experience, maybe you'd rather have no experience. And because I think when you look at the Lightning, they have certain players on this team who have a tremendous amount of experience and positive experience. They've won. Mm-hmm. But to your point, we also know they've been bounced in the first round the last 3 years. So how much did that experience help at all? You could say from that 30,000-foot view, well, obviously, Greg and Dave, it didn't help them a lot because they didn't make it out of the first round. So I think that is also an interesting narrative. How much does experience matter in this series, knowing that the Lightning, to a degree, have more of it than Montreal, but we also know it hasn't necessarily allowed them to make deep runs the last 3 years. Conversely, Montreal, there's some experience, but not nearly as much as the Lightning. But is that even a factor at this point?
So let me make a distinction. I think there's a huge difference between no collective experience and a little bit of collective experience. By a little bit of collective experience, that really is the Montreal Canadiens I'm talking about, because they had a playoff appearance last year. That one playoff appearance propels them to basically, to me, on equal footing with the Lightning. It's really the teams that are in it for the first time that have to experience it. But you don't need like 6-7 straight years of playoff, appearances to understand what it takes. I think you need to taste it, though. So there is a difference. That's why we've talked so much about Buffalo. And again, we're not trying to pick on Buffalo. Dave Andreychuk said the same thing when he was joining us. He lived through that with the Lightning. He himself had a ton of playoff experience, but he understood in the 2003 playoffs, the collective group of the Tampa Bay Lightning didn't have that experience, and it affected them at the beginning of that series against Washington. They lost the first 2 at home. What Andy said was, I'd like to see the Sabres start on the road, because there's pressure in starting at home, and when you don't have, they're going to be facing a team with more experience than them, Boston. So we'll see what happens in game 1. Montreal is not in that position anymore. Last year, maybe they were, but they went through a pretty hard-fought series with Washington. They won a game at home. They had some overtime. They had one overtime game in there. I think that that's what they needed. So I don't see an advantage for the Lightning in terms of experience. Where the Lightning may have, I don't even know that it's an advantage, but it's like, I think the Lightning have more of a bone to pick with how the recent years have gone. The Canadiens are like, hey, we weren't in the playoffs. Then we made the playoffs. Okay, we lost her, and now we're back in the playoffs. We've improved on last year. Let's move forward. The Lightning are like, 4 straight years of losing the first round? No. You know the difference there? So I think that second version, the Lightning's version, is a little bit more of a dig-in version. that may actually work to the Lightning's advantage. I may be wrong about this, but I know I said this a couple of weeks ago on the show. I think this is a motivating factor for the Lightning that the Canadiens just don't have. The Canadiens are in a different position. They are where they are. The Lightning are in a different spot. The Lightning are a franchise that has, won cups, gone to the final, and now all of a sudden, in the last 3 years, we want to say all of a sudden, it's been a different experience, and that doesn't sit well with them. Canadians are just in a different boat. They're like the Lightning in 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Lightning had a taste of it in 2014, got swept by Montreal, came back in 2015, and they were able to get all the way to the Stanley Cup final. That's what the Canadiens' position is like. Now, not every team in year 2 gets the Stanley Cup final, and the Lightning in 2015 very easily could have lost in the first round to Detroit. So I'm not saying this is some fait accompli for the Canadiens. I'm just saying that's where the Canadiens are at. Young group, got a taste last year, back for more, eager to improve, but I'm not sure that they have kind of a bone to pick, if that's the right way of putting it, with how recent history has gone. I don't think that they are too torn up about losing in the first round last year after they got over the disappointment of having lost. They're like, hey, we had a great year. We got great experience in the playoffs. It didn't work out for us, but we're going to come back stronger next year. And they did come back stronger this season. They improved upon their play from last year. They're a better team this year than they were last year. So we'll see how that dynamic plays out. I will probably be writing a column tomorrow for the Lightning's website, kind of previewing the series and some of the keys, if you will, and some of the things we've talked about on the show, but I'll just revisit them here. Maybe talking about them will help me organize my thoughts. But, the one big key that jumps right off the page is going to be the Suzuki line and who the Lightning are going to try and match against that line. So had Pontus Holmberg not gotten hurt, I think it for sure would have been Gord, Girgensons, and Holmberg when John Cooper could get that matchup. When the teams are playing in Montreal, Marty St. Louis may elect for a different matchup with last change. Even as the road team, though, you can kind of try and work the matchups best you can. No Holmberg. So will it be Nick Paul? And if Nick Paul is on that line, will that line get that assignment? And if they get that assignment, how will they do? That may be, in some ways, the biggest key in the series to me. Because if the Suzuki line does not produce at the level that they are used to producing, the Canadiens have whittled down their paths to victory. It's not that they can't win, but now you're going to rely on a bunch of other guys, and they have Demidov and Kapanen, not on the first line, or they win a bunch of games 2-1. I mean, there are other ways to win, but the easiest path for the Canadiens to win this series is to have Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slafkovsky produce. That is their easiest path, most direct path. If they check that box, then the onus is on the Lightning to find different ways to overcome that. Maybe they match them with their top guys. Maybe, they hook and by crook it with special teams play or something like that. But that's why it's such a big key, because they are the engine of that Montreal team. You got a 100-point guy, you got a 50-goal guy on that line, and then Hudson is part of that too. So that to me is one big key. A second big key is Kucherov. I mean, plain and simple. Kucherov has had a couple of playoff years. Well, I mean, I think Kucherov is motivated too. We heard Kucherov at the beginning of the season basically rip the power play in the playoffs. Well, actually, not even in the playoffs. He ripped the power play last year. I mean, we heard him say at the beginning of training camp, our power play numbers were inflated by doing well against non-playoff teams. The data disproved that a little bit in the regular season, but there's no question the power play hurt them in that series against the Panthers last year. 3 for 18. Yeah. They might have been able to flip one or two of those games, the two close games they lost, for sure, games 2 and 4, had their power play come through for them, and it didn't. So Kucherov lumped in with the power play. That is kind of the same as what I just said about the Canadiens. If Kucherov and the power play both individually and collectively, because if Kucherov is producing, it's probably happening on the power play. But if he also produces 5-on-5, that is certainly one path to victory for the Lightning. The Canadiens are targeting Kucherov. We saw Josh Anderson. They know how valuable Kucherov is to the Lightning winning this series. So that is also a key. I think that, when you look at special teams, we don't know how many power plays are going to happen. Both these teams have good power plays. So, kind of adjacent to the Kucherov question is, which penalty kill will do a better job? And that will probably be a key as well. So those are just a few of them off the top of my head. And then the last one I'm just going to say is, which team is going to handle the key injury better? Each team has a key injury. And this is kind of tied to the Gord line question, but the Lightning have a key injury to Holmberg, and the Canadiens have a key injury to Noah Dobson. And which team is going to be able to kind of cover that the best they can and find another person to fill that role best they can.
It's interesting you mentioned power play for Kucherov, because you and I have had a discussion. You've brought this up a number of times, and Brian kind of backed you up on this last night in terms of, unsolicited, by the way, that, look, if you're going to tell me what's going to be more important to a playoff victory, a good penalty kill or a good power play, it's going to be a good penalty kill, and I've come around to that. I think there's value there. However, just to be the contrarian, we do know that the Lightning, for the most part, felt like they struggled and didn't defeat the Panthers and move to the second round, in large part because of how ineffective their power play was in that series. So I am curious to see if, for the Lightning, the power play is a bigger deal than being really good on the PK. Now, you could sit there and say, well, you can be good at both. Yes, that's true. But which one is going to impact a series more for the Lightning and their best players, when you just mentioned, and I agree with you, by the way, that if Kucherov is getting into the game and dominating a game, there's a good chunk of that that's probably coming off the power play.
Mm-hmm.
And if the power
play
is not working,
for sure, yeah.
But if the power play isn't working, partner, in many ways, is that a bigger impact on the Lightning than the PK? I don't know what the answer is to that, because I think the Lightning need to obviously be sound in both. But if it's tied so much, the power play, to your best offensive player, and that part of the area isn't going well for the Lightning, that's advantage Montreal. That is. Yes, we can say 5-on-5, and I agree. But again, the Lightning can do damage on the power play more than a lot of other teams because of Kucherov's ability. If that becomes neutralized, that's a storyline. And it was last year. And it could be moving forward. So I would say in most instances, I would probably agree with you that the PK needs to be better than the power play if you want to give yourself the best chance to win a series.
Yeah, I've been consistent with that, and I still believe it.
I don't disagree with it, but I'm wondering for the Lightning if that percentage, whatever it is you have, let's say the PKs, that needs to be, if we're looking at special teams, I'd rather have the PK clicking on all cylinders and the power play contributing a little bit than vice versa. I don't know if that comes up a little bit more on the power play for the Lightning, knowing how important it is and how dominant Kucherov is from that perspective. Mm-hmm. Because I think if you take that away from the Lightning, there can be some 5-on-5 issues, potentially. Especially if Holmberg's out, and now you're talking about lines that are just a little bit different. What is that going to do to the team 5-on-5? Look, time will tell. This is just this is talk before we see it happen. But we're going off of what we saw last year, and that power play was neutralized, and it did have an impact. And so I'm curious to see if the Lightning's power play will be better. It might be, because Montreal is different than Florida, for sure. But how does the Lightning's power play just respond in general compared to what we saw last year?
Well, if you ask Kucherov, he would say that is maybe the biggest key in the series. Is he
wrong? Is he wrong, you think?
Well, see, I think there are keys to a series, plural. So can the Lightning win a series with the power play not producing? I think they can, but they're going to need to have other things go well. Like their penalty kill is going to have to match what the Canadiens' penalty kill is doing. And if it doesn't, then you got to find other ways to account for that, right? If they can decisively win the 5-on-5 matchup, then they can absorb a hit in terms of the special teams battle. I still think at the end of the series, if we are looking back in the series, when we recap the series, Greg, and we say the Lightning were able to hold Suzuki, Caulfield, and Slavkovsky basically to a point a game. So they come out of the series, if it's 6 games, those 3 guys have 6 points each. Maybe one guy has 5. That is good for the Lightning. Like, that is probably going to be the scenario in a Lightning series win. If Caulfield and Suzuki are up around like 6 games, 11, 12 points, 13 points, that's probably not good news for the Lightning. Okay. At the same time, if we see that, the Lightning won the special teams battle, let's say, whether both teams scored a fair amount on the power play or both teams scored less on the power play. If the Lightning win the special teams battle, they will probably be in a good spot. And if they lose the special teams battle, they will not be in a good spot. And the last thing I'm going to mention, I didn't mention this in the keys because it's not really a key per se, but it's more like when we see this, we know that it's going to have to change. And we've talked about this. 1-9 in their last 10 home playoff games. So if we come out of the series and we're saying, let's just say it went 6, if the Lightning won 2 home games or 3 in 6 games, they're probably going to win the series. In fact, if they win 3 home games and it goes 6, they will have won the series. If they win 2 home games, to lose the series in 6, they would have to go 0-3 in Montreal, which, you have to be able to win on the road as well. But this 1-9 at home has absolutely short-circuited the Lightning's ability to win a series, certainly in 2 of the 3 years. 2024, they went 1-1 against the Panthers, but they lost game 3 at home, put them down 3-0 in the series. They lost all 3 home games to Toronto in 2023. They lost all 3 home games to Florida last year. Those were killer losses. So again, what are we going to see at the end of the series? Where the Lightning have turned the ship around in terms of their home record in playoff games going back the last few years, and we don't know if we're going to have overtime games. These things can be cyclical. They're not always cyclical, but they've been cyclical for the Lightning because they are 1-11 in their last 12 playoff overtime games, which came on the heels of a tremendous run. I didn't add it up, but I know that they won a ton of overtime games prior to going 1-11. In the last 12. Actually started with Corey Perry scoring against them in Game 5 of the 2020 Stanley Cup Final. They lost that game. They went 0-4 in overtime in 2021, even winning the Stanley Cup, but they only lost 1 overtime game per series, so they spread it out. 2022, they won an overtime game in the first round to help them beat Toronto, but then they lost 2 overtime games in the Stanley Cup Final to Colorado. We mentioned 2023, 3 overtime losses all at home to Toronto. And in 2024, they lost game 2. I think it was game 2. Yeah, game 2 against the Panthers in overtime. Add them up. That's 1-11. So again, if we get an overtime game or multiple overtime games, how are the Lightning doing in these coin toss games? You have to find a way to win close games if you're going to have success in a playoff series or in a playoff year.
Yeah, it's. I'm reading some of these comments we're getting in here, and we can get to some questions. But I agree with what you're saying. Upholtz Radio. Greg says, "You guys truly don't understand how refreshing this show is for me on a daily basis, especially throughout some very challenging events in my life. Shoot, I've listened since the bubble, so thank you."
Thank you, Greg, with 3 G's.
I love Greg.
I'm including the Greg at the beginning of the name.
Yeah, don't include the G at the beginning.
That's sorry.
A given. It's the G's at the end. We've got double G's, 1 G.
Well, you're the expert with
I am the expert.
Greg.
If there's nothing else, it's about Greg's,
Look, we try and bring honesty and fairness and assessment that is how we see it, but if we can be kind of a therapy for Lightning fans at times, we're glad to be that too. But we are sorry, Greg, if you've been through challenges in your life, but we're glad that you found the show that helps
and hopefully it helps
a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Adam says, what's the key aspect you think the Bolts need to execute to win this series? Mish, we were kind of talking about that.
Yeah, I talked about the Suzuki line. What's bundled up in all this is what was mentioned, I think, by a fan on yesterday's show. The Lightning's ability to defend the rush against the Canadiens and not, hemorrhage chances is going to be important. Because that, in some ways, is the strength of Montreal's game. Kobe talked about their movement in the offensive zone, which makes it tricky, to defend, particularly if you're more of a man-on-man team, because they're going to try and draw you away from your spot on the ice as a defender. But, really the Canadiens' bread and butter is their team speed. And they can attack you just when they have control of the puck. They can attack you when you have the puck and lose it.
Yeah.
So I forget exactly how the fan asked the question, but that's going to be important. Again, at the end of the series, we're going to be like, all right, how many goals did the Canadiens score in the series, and how did they score those goals? And if the Lightning just gave up too many goals off the rush, they're probably going to be in trouble in the series.
You start to get into the logistics of defending home ice percentages, like the Lightning go up 2-0, what are the percentages they come out and win the series? Like you start to get in those, can you get a win on the road? Like that's Montreal. You hear this all the time. You start on the road, get a split. And so for the Lightning, how are you able to negate that from happening?
Well, you take it one at a time. You try and
you have to look ahead.
Look, the winner of game one puts pressure on the team that lost game one for
Correct.
game two. And that's true certainly if you're the home team and you lose game one, there's a lot of pressure in game two. If the road team loses game one, they're like, okay, well, we still have another chance to get a split here. But now there is more pressure in game two to get the split, because if you lose game two, then you got to win 4 or 5. What's interesting about this rivalry between the Lightning and Canadiens, if you want to call it that, which I think there is a rivalry, but this playoff history is what I'm trying to say. The teams have met 4 times. The Lightning have won 3. The Canadiens have won 1. The one year they met in the Stanley Cup final, because that was the year of the conference play. So it just how it unfolded with the brackets. They met in the final. That's never going to happen again as long as we have East versus West meeting in the final. The other times they met were either in the first round or the second round. So the one year they met in the first round, the Canadiens swept the Lightning. The 2 years they met in the second round, the Lightning beat Montreal once 4-0 and once 4-2. In all of the series, all 4 of those series, the team that won game 1 also won game 2. So we've never had a split after 2 games. Now, sometimes the road team has won the first 2. The Canadiens did it in 2014. The Lightning did it in 2015. In the other 2 instances, 04 and 21, the Lightning had home ice and they won the first 2 at home. Puts a ton of pressure on the team that is down 0-2. I know there's that talk, it's not really a series until, a road team wins. Look, let's be honest.
You go down 0-2, come on.
Even if you were coming home for game 3, if you were down 0-2, you have such little margin for error. So that's why it's not just let's get a split. Like if you can get the split, it just pushes the needle turning in one direction or the other down the road a little bit. And now it's a best of 5 where you as the lower seed get the extra game at home. But you got to hold serve on home ice. That doesn't always happen too. Last year the Lightning lost the first 2 at home. They won game 3 in Florida and were in position to win game 4. So the start of the series sets the tone for maybe how the series is going to unfold, but it's not be-all, end-all. Having said that, if the Lightning lose game 1, and now we're coming on the show and saying they're 1-10 in their last home playoff games, last whatever it is, 11 home playoff games, like this has to stop. They have to find a way to pick up wins.
And those losses, who are those losses to? That's Florida and Colorado? towards the
and
end.
Toronto.
Right? Dallas.
Yeah, and Toronto.
I mean, those are 4 really good teams at the time, right? I mean,
yeah.
And how many of those won the Stanley Cup? 3 out of the 4, correct?
Right.
Because Florida won twice,
yeah.
back to back. And
yeah,
Colorado
3 teams because they did it twice. They've played Florida.
That's what I mean. So
yeah,
that record is poor, but it is not like they got bounced by the 8th seed.
Correct.
And so I want to bring a little context to that. That doesn't excuse the home ice debacle. Let's call it that. I mean, the Lightning during that time, the Lightning felt like they were a championship caliber team. So to not get a win or only have one during that time, John Cooper would say that's unacceptable. You're not going to win many series if that's our record on home.
What did we just say about the Rangers? This was in the regular season. The Rangers, they were above 500, hockey 500 on the road. They went 14, 20, and 6 at MSG.
Yeah.
You're not going to make the playoffs going 14, 20, and 6 at home. You're not going to win a playoff series losing more at home than you win.
And I don't know what to make of that other than they played some really good teams. I don't, why that record's not better.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we could go back and look and, this game they didn't do this, that
Well,
game,
the first 5, if we go back, the first 5 were all 1-goal losses. And 4 of them were in overtime. So maybe that set the ball rolling potentially. They lost game 4 to Colorado in overtime. They lost game 6 2-1. Then they lost the 3 games to Toronto in 2023 at home, all in overtime. Since then, I mean, they do have a win against Florida in 2024, but like I said, that was when they were down 3-0. The Florida wins have been more lopsided. Game 2 last year was 1-0, 2-0 with an empty netter. But the other games, the Panthers have, we'll just say they've won comfortably.
Yeah.
In Tampa. So they got to figure out a way to improve that. I mean, that's not specific to the series. We'd be saying that no matter who they played in the first round.
And that's a weird stat, but it's one that sticks out.
And we actually, I was telling you guys, I was like going back and trying to add it up, and Steve and I talked through it together. Prior to going 1-9 in the last 10 home playoff games, in the 15 home playoff games prior to that, the Lightning went 14-1. And that's post-bubble. That's not including, that's after they won the 2020 Cup.
Wow.
So they went 14-1 over a 15-game span in the playoffs at home, followed by 1-9.
Mm-hmm.
But what can we say about the 14-1? When they went 14-1, they got to the Stanley Cup final and won it, and they got to the Stanley Cup final. Because this current streak started in the Colorado series. So just the opposite is also true. If you go 14-1 over 15 home playoff games, you're going to be winning a lot of series, which is what happened.
It's very true.
I mean, that's extreme. Yeah. We talk about cycles. Like,
they're both
crazy.
Yeah, they're both extreme.
And at some point, I need to go back and look at their overtime record prior to game 5 of the Dallas series. I know the Islanders beat them in game 5 in the bubble as well in overtime, but for the most part, the Lightning were winning a lot of overtime games prior to the Perry goal against them in 2020.
Tonight, enjoy some Reif Rum, smooth, versatile, now pouring at Benchmark International Arena. Order a tropical wave or a Lightning Mule and taste why fans are switching. Reif Rum is a premium craft Florida local rum built on authenticity, quality, and easy drinkability. Ask for Reif Rum by name. Go Bolts. Enjoy responsibly. Let's get to some more questions. Farrell says, not putting too much weight on our recent power play struggles since it's the end of the season, but it's been noticeable that in the playoffs, anytime a team has an aggressive PK, we can't handle it. I hope they adjust.
Well, really, you're talking about Florida.
I was going to say, that has to be Florida specific there.
The Florida aggressive PK has really hurt the Lightning. Some aggressive PKs, though, get out of position. So, there's no one surefire way to stop a power play. It's about executing. It's about executing the way you want to run your penalty kill. So we'll see what the Canadiens decide to do. Dobson is a big part of their penalty kill because he blocks a lot of shots. Now he's on the right side which is kind of the opposite side from where Kucherov and then Radish in the middle would be. And the Lightning tend to run things on the other side. But we'll see how the Canadiens decide to play it, right?
So
are they going to be
devil's
aggressive
advocate
and potentially get out of position, but go for disrupting plays? Or are they going to be a little bit more packed in and protect the middle?
My question to you, and you probably don't have the answer to this, it's more of thinking out loud. Do you have to have a certain type of personnel to pressure on the PK night in and night out? In other words, it's not like my guys up top have to be 6'2", 6'3", and they have to have long reaches. Like I think that's a strategy that a coach implements and says, we just want to be aggressive. I guess what I'm saying to you is we've seen the Panthers do it to the Lightning, and it's bothered them.
Yes.
Why wouldn't we see more teams do that to the Lightning? What is preventing other teams from doing that? Is it exposing your
first
goaltender?
of all, you set up your penalty kill the way you're going to set up your penalty kill. So you can make an adjustment based on the opponent, but you basically, your penalty kill is your penalty kill. Like that's what you have taught your penalty killers to do.
Yep.
And we brought up this example a couple of years ago. The Kings were number 2 in the NHL in penalty kill. I mean, they've been a pretty good penalty kill team regardless. But I remember the Lightning went into LA and the Kings were number 2 in the NHL in penalty kill. And it was definitely in the second half of the year. It might have been just past the second half of the year. And they were super passive. They just let Kucherov have the puck. And they're like, we are just not letting any pucks get to dangerous areas. So like we are packing it in. It's like rush hour on I-4. Like there's nowhere to go with this puck. And that's one way to go. That was the way they chose to kill penalties, and they did it really, really well. You have to hold your structure, though, and not let any seams open up if you're going to take that approach. The other approach is like blitzing in football. Are you going to get to the quarterback? And honestly, and I think even the Panthers are following this, mode of thinking. It's a lot. The passive kills have to read plays too. They have to adjust to where the puck is going and make sure they're staying in the way, essentially. An aggressive kill has to read when they have a chance to pressure. Because if you just like willy-nilly, let's just say Kucherov, if you willy-nilly go to Kucherov and he has time to slip the puck to somebody else, you're out of position. So I think what the Panthers have done well is they have picked their spots, but they are erring on the side of being aggressive rather than passive. But when they have a chance to close and create some chaos, they do it. But I think what we've seen is when, Kucherov just has the puck and he's standing at the top of the circle, the Panthers don't necessarily rush at him. It's usually when the puck is coming to him, that penalty killer is like, I have a chance to get there and force Kucherov to do something before he wants to do it. I think that's where we've seen the Panthers be really, really effective. And they also read the Lightning's power play quite well. So they can seem to anticipate when the puck is coming to Kucherov. So it's even less like a quarterback getting blitzed. It's more like a wide receiver catching a ball with the safety about to tackle him, right? Yeah. Like, can he hold on to the ball? Can he do something with the ball? Maybe not a great example, but so thank you, Steve. NHL just announced Lightning Canadiens game 1 is Sunday. So time to be determined, but the Lightning will not play until Sunday. So they get an extra day, which is not a bad thing.
That's good for them.
Because the Canadiens didn't play yesterday. Yeah. So that's my way of answering the question. I honestly don't know what the Canadiens are going to do in terms of their penalty kill. I think that they're more of a middle of the road. Like when they have a chance to pressure, they'll pressure, but they're not as aggressive as Carolina or Florida. But I guess I should have been paying closer attention to, when the Lightning played them during the regular season and what their penalty kill looked like.
I guess
the Lightning also didn't have their full personnel in the last meeting because Hagel wasn't in the lineup when the teams met in Montreal. I guess for power play 1, I'm talking about.
Yeah, I guess, when we talk about the reason I asked the question, and you bring up a very valid point, like your PK is your PK, it is set, this is what you do. But that doesn't mean you can't deviate from it.
You can. Yeah,
and
sure.
I guess we're in an era where there is so much film study and adjustments and things like that that not adjusting to an opponent's perceived weakness seems odd to me. In other words,
but is it a weakness, Greg? I said, like, if you are going to pressure Kucherov, you better get there. Because if you don't get there, he is going to find somebody open, and you are going to be in scramble mode.
So there's always that risk. I'm talking, and this is probably more recency bias, and I don't like using that word, but I'm using it, that the Florida Panthers really took the Lightning out of sync. And they took control of that series in large part because the Lightning didn't have an answer for that. I think we've seen Carolina do some pressuring, correct, partner, when it comes to their PK?
Oh, yeah, because they're just a pressure team.
And so the question becomes, if you see those two teams do that to the Lightning, understanding whatever you do, there's risk. If you play off of the Lightning and you allow Kucherov to see the ice, he could pick you apart. Carolina and Florida have taken the path, we're going to come out and make you uncomfortable. And I think with the eye test, I don't have the stats to back it up. Maybe we can find that with our crack staff of 50 who can do some looking up, that maybe those teams do better when it comes to killing off a Lightning's power play than a team who's more passive. And what I'm saying is it's a copycat league. And if you're under the belief and the notion that a pressuring PK has more success than a passive one when taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning, if I'm Marty St. Louis and the Montreal Canadiens in this series, do you think part of their game plan at all will be, hey, I know we've done it this way, but I've seen it done this way better? Maybe at some point in the series, maybe, we make that adjustment and become more of a pressuring team. I don't know if that takes a lot of tactical juggling to go from passive to aggressive. But I'm not a head coach, so maybe Marty's saying we would push back.
You're describing the Canadiens as like passive, completely one end of the spectrum. From what I remember, and I'm not remembering it as clearly as I know Florida's penalty kill or Carolina's, because Carolina is so clearly aggressive. Like, I remember when the Canadiens have a chance to disrupt a play, they will try and disrupt a play. I just don't think that they look to disrupt every play. They are concerned about also holding their structure and not allowing a seam pass through, or, essentially pulling their players out of position to try and intercept a puck. But if there's a bobble, right, if there's a chance to kind of force a player to a tough spot where that player can get closed on, you're angling a player to a tough spot, I think then they do become aggressive. The other part of power play success is winning faceoffs, which at times has been a problem for the Lightning. I'm actually going to refresh my memory here and see where the Canadiens are on faceoffs. They're 11th. Actually, there were a bunch of teams tied for 9th. So I know Danault is a very good penalty killer, and Jake Evans is a very good penalty killer. I want to say that they are the two that usually take faceoffs, depending on the side. So I'm actually going to look up their stats as we were talking about this and just see how they did on penalty kill faceoffs. So Evans is very good, 55.9% on the season, and he basically took about 200, and in fact he took exactly 220 faceoffs. He won 121 of them and lost 99. So, for what is that? For every 6 faceoffs taken, he went 6 and 5 basically for every 11 faceoffs. But if you multiply that out, that's pretty impressive. Danault was also very good, 56.2. This is just during his time in Montreal, and he was above 50% on shorthanded faceoffs, 43 and 37. So just looking at that, the Lightning's power play in part will be tied to their effectiveness at trying to win faceoffs. Canadiens, I just told you, they have two on the right. It's Evans. On the left, it's Danault, the goalie. And they probably have both guys out there, depending on which circle the Lightning pick. The Lightning are going to try and win some faceoffs on power play. So that's an advantage, Montreal. Faceoffs, 11th. I wasn't aware that they were that high. Suzuki is a nick over 50%. He takes nearly all of their power play faceoffs, and he lost 2 more power play faceoffs than he won. So he's basically right at 50%. he basically takes all of them.
For sure.
I mean, they have Kapanen with nearly 50, but Suzuki took about 300. So Kapanen's out there when the second unit comes out and there's a face-off, which doesn't happen very often.
Scott says, looking forward to see if the Lightning experience helps them impose their will. Losing in the first round is not an option. Let's hope they come out with that kind of intensity.
See, we touched on this, Scott, at the beginning of the show. I don't think their experience in this series is an advantage, which is not to say their experience is not worth anything. I just think the Canadiens have experience too. They got experience last year. Now, the losing in the first round was the other thing I talked about. I think the Lightning have a different sort of incentive than Montreal has, just based on what's happened the last few years. I don't know if that's going to help them win the series, but it is definitely a motivating factor for Tampa Bay.
It is not an option. The standard is the standard. Mike, I mean, this is a question we've debated. How can they just flip the switch when they went 1 for 30 on the power play to end the season?
Yeah, so some of that, not all of it, but some of it was, if you're going to put Hagel on the first unit, and I think he will be on the first unit, the Lightning really didn't have their first unit together for much of the end of the regular season because Hagel missed a bunch of time. Radish missed some games. They did hold Point and Gensel out of the last game of the regular season. And so they were inserting different players. Now, when Bjorkstrand was in there for Hagel, you might say, well, Bjorkstrand has been on that unit. But I feel like they didn't use Bjorkstrand as much. It was somebody else. It was Corey Perry. It was Gonsalves. Like, we just saw different guys out on the first unit. I think in this series, assuming everyone is able to play, and there's no reason to believe in game one the Lightning won't be able to use the 5 guys I'm going to mention, that will be their unit. Radish, Kucherov, Point, Gensel, Hagel. Let's see how they do. I know it was 1 power play goal in the last 11 games. That's not great, but I think some of it was tied to the fact that they had different units out there. And remember, I mean, was in the last 11, Kucherov missed those 2? Was that in the last 11? Where he was sick and he missed both games over the weekend? I don't remember how far back that was, but that might have been in there too. You're pulling Kucherov out. That affects your power play, right?
Yep, for sure. All good questions, all concerns, I think we have. I think one of the conclusions we're coming to is that special teams, and specifically the power play for the Lightning and how they do on home ice, are 2 things that are going to be interesting in this series.
Yeah.
I do. Because I think if they are, I don't know if I'm stating the obvious, but sometimes the obvious needs to be stated. If they do a little bit better on the power play in this series compared to what they did against Florida, and do a little bit better on home ice collectively than what they've done the last 3 years on home ice, I think I feel good about what they're going to accomplish, assuming there's other things that happen, right? The goaltending is solid. They're defending hard. No significant injuries. I mean, let's also talk about the elephant in the room a little bit here, please. I know he wasn't right all season long. I mean, it was an up and down. Not having a Victor Hedman at that level that we're used to seeing is a big deal. They've done well without him. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we're going to use that as an excuse if things go south. But he is your guy back there to a degree. And it was an off year for him. Don't know when he's coming back, partner. But for the sake of my point here, if you had a relatively healthy Victor Hedman going into the series and somebody who was coming off a 55 to 70 point season on the back end, that's a significant player. That's not, no offense to him, Declan Carlisle. You know, somebody who comes in and fills a job, fills a role. Victor Hedman, when he's humming, is an elite defenseman still in this league. So, Tampa Bay, good to hear from you, says, do you feel like Tampa Bay has been missing that third line for a while now since Blake Coleman was so good and physical for us?
Well, I think the Gord line, if we're going to call that their third line, they were fantastic for the Lightning this year.
You know, I had this discussion. I think I brought this up. We have about 10 minutes left in the show, and maybe we can get into this tomorrow. We're going to tape tomorrow's show, by the way. I had this with Jay Retcher, who does his own show, and he does a great job. And he was trying to say that if you think the Yanni Gourde line is the third line for this team, do you need to see more offensive production from them if that's the line that's going to be playing third line minutes? And I understand where he's coming from. By the way, we can probably throw that out the door a little bit because Holmberg's not going to be in the lineup for game one, I don't think, right? I mean,
yeah, no, he's not.
So let's be fair there. So what is that line going to look like, partner, in your opinion? If you were to say, is it going to be Nick Paul on that line with Gergensen?
I think so.
And Gourde?
Yeah.
So there is an opportunity for that line to produce more because I think Paul, compared to Holmberg, is a better offensive player. I think that's fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do you need that line to, in addition to being a shutdown line, let's call that what it is, does it have it in them to chip in at the rate that a third line would in a playoff series? Because we're getting this question about the depth and where things are and beyond the two lines, who's going to fill the role. I always look at that Holmberg, Gourde, Gergensen's line. For me, I just have it in my head that they're your typical fourth line, and they're going to go out there, play good defense, and not give you a ton of offense. But the minutes suggest otherwise, that they played this year, and they played a vital role in shutting down the other team's top lines. But with that, do you think they need to produce more offensively than what they projected?
Yeah, there are all these like sayings about playoffs. It's not a series until the home team loses a game, and you need your best players to be your best players. And Chief on the last call last night, he told that story of a former teammate of his who was a French Canadian. He's like, not the star, the plumber, who determined the series. That's funny. It's like the plumbers determine the series. So the top two lines cancel each other out. It's based on the bottom six. Like, there's so many different ways to win and lose a series. If you have a bunch of 2-1 games, you don't need a lot of offense. But that means that other stuff is happening for you that's really elite, like, goaltending, team defense. I don't know. I mean, the Lightning finished, what did they finish in terms of offense this year? I'm going to look it up I want to say it was second or third. Am I remembering that right? No, they dropped down a little bit, so they were fourth. But they're still a top 5 offensive team. They scored plenty of goals this year, Greg. Yeah, Kucherov had 130 points, but, they did score a lot of goals. So I don't think scoring is really on the top of my red flag list. The red flag for me would be more like, how are they handling the rush, and are they getting out of the defensive zone cleanly the first time? Those are going to be kind of the pressure points that I'm looking at. And of course, the Canadiens want to force things in their favor in those two categories. They want to attack off the rush and create chances, and they want to prevent the Lightning from clearing the zone. So they spend a lot of time in the offensive zone. That, to me, is more important than if Yanni Gourde scores a bunch of goals in this series. I think they can win a series where if it's Gourde, Gergensen, and Paul, they only chip in, let's just say, a nominal amount. But every goal that they chip in would be a bonus. Yes, I'm not disputing that. I just don't know how important. Of the list of important things, that one is not near the top of the list for me. But that's why I put a lot of the onus on Kucherov. Right?
Agreed.
And if it's not Kucherov, if Kucherov just has an average, by his standards, average series, then it's got to, you're going to look to somebody else, whether it's Hagel, Point, Gensel, Radish. The Lightning they can score from the blue line,
Agreed. This is always interesting. We don't even want to hear it. Scott, if they don't get out of the first round, major changes will most likely occur. That
we can say about Julian Breezewell, he is not knee-jerk. He's not. So he's measured about everything that he does. And I think he will look at this regular season and say, we did a lot of really good things for the second year in a row. Why did we not get out of the first round? What is missing? from our team. Now, last year, some of it was a lot of injuries. They had a lot of injuries last year. They also faced the defending champs who were on their way to a second straight cup. So you're not operating completely in a vacuum, and you're not operating like with blinders on to, some real factors that can affect your ability to win a playoff series. But at the end of the day, the results are the results. So, I can't really argue with the fans' contention earlier when they said losing in the first round is unacceptable or whatever. So I have no idea what would happen if they lose in the first round. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully they take care of business in this series.
Taking care of business. Speaking of taking care of business, that's my neighbor, Lucas. Should I be impressed or worried? This team finished with 106 points with down years from Point, Paul, Hedman, and Bjorky, and less points from last year for Hagel and Cirelli. Kuch and Radish carried the team. So I think Hagel and Cirelli had really good years.
Yep. Hagel had 36 goals. He just didn't have as many assists.
Did you include Lucas in there? I think Gensel had a really good year.
Yep.
Gensel was, the second leading scorer, sniper, and I think put Vasi in that category as having an outstanding year. So, the guys you mentioned, like Kuch, MVP, potentially. Vasi, best goaltender in the league. That's high level. Radish, I'd throw Moser in there as well.
He set the record for goals by a defenseman. So,
yeah, and I would put Moser in there with Radish. I think those two, because they played well with one another, I think they fed off of each other to a degree. So should you be impressed or worried? I think impressed is where I would go, and maybe that's being the optimist.
Yeah, and the total goals scored, it was close. They were a little bit down from where they were last year, but they were number one in the league last year. They were at 3.56. This year they finished 3.49 in terms of goals scored per game.
Love it. So, Lucas, I think what everybody will be watching early on, how do the Lightning start the game? Have they been able to flip the switch and all of a sudden they look buttoned up? And then there are some things that are more specific to that. How are the special teams?
Mm-hmm.
How the game is going to be called is going to be interesting because that'll impact the special teams, of course.
Yes, of course.
And then how physical does it get? Because I just Jack-Eye, and I think it's actually, for me, it's more of Anderson than Jack-Eye. I think Jack-Eye around the net is going to be dirty.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's going to be anything you and I haven't seen before. I think anybody comes close to their goaltender, he's gonna man up. He's going to give you a cross-check, and that's probably fair game. I think I want to see what is Josh Anderson's role in this. Because that big body, he gets moving, he's not stopping. He's going to hit you. And is he going to target the Lightning's best players? Rick Tocchet was doing a press conference yesterday. I just saw clips of this on X. And he obviously has a history with the Penguins and Malkin and Crosby. And he basically came out and said, we're going after them. That's Rick Tocchet, who, the ultimate warrior in many ways. But if I'm Montreal, wouldn't that be your mindset with Anderson? Hey, what you did last game, I want that ratcheted up. But you're 6'5". Go ahead and hit anything that moves. And I could see him really stirring the pot. And it's not that the Lightning aren't going to respond to that because they have shown they will. But does it take them out of their element? Do they stay composed to a degree? I have no problem with them pushing back on that type of behavior, particularly if it's late in the game and things are out of control. The Lightning have shown that. But just within the confines of within the whistles, how are you able to handle that while at the same time playing your game?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be curious to see. And conversely, same message for the Lightning. Punish the other team's best players.
Right.
Easier said than done. We know that. Those are slippery, dynamic, offensive players, both at the forward position and on the back end. But, I mean, Lane Hudson's probably my size. Would you agree? I mean, he's 5'8".
I think you may be thicker than Lane Hudson.
I'm thicker.
Yeah.
I'm thicker. Few more dinners there. But, I mean, he's 160 pounds, maybe 170. Like, if you can hit him.
Right. He's very fast and slippery.
He is.
Sure.
He is. But, I mean, like, that would be kind of my MO there a little bit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that. Kobe was talking a little bit about that on the show yesterday about wearing down the other team through a series. And if the Lightning can lean on, Chief talks about this a lot, lean on Suzuki, lean on Coffey, lean on Hudson repeatedly, they're feeling a body on theirs, right? They're having to fight through checks constantly. That can have a cumulative effect. In fairness, I think that cumulative effect rises to the surface more later in a playoff year, not as much in the first round, but it can happen in the first round, depending on how difficult you're going to make life for them, which is what the Canadiens want to do with Kucherov. It's kind of the same game plan for both teams with the high skill players on the other side.
Yeah. By the way, we are going to get more of this and the opposing team's fan base listening to our show. Mm-hmm. We welcome that, by the way. 05 says, from a Habs fan, so many unknowns in this series. Hedman possibly out. How will missing Dobson affect the Habs? How will the nagging injuries for the Bolts affect them?
So, I mean, reading the tea leaves, I think Hedman's out for the series.
I would agree.
I mean, I don't know that for certain, but I wouldn't count on him coming in. The nagging injuries, I mean, players play through injuries. The Lightning have tried to rest up their players. You can also get new injuries in the playoffs. So I wouldn't think that there are any nagging injuries that have kept players out late in the regular season, notably Hagel and Radish, that would affect their ability to play and play well in the series. That's just my opinion. Players are used to playing. Players who have been through playoff runs know what it's like to play not at 100%. And usually what you hear is the teams that win the Stanley Cup or go deep in the playoffs, there are a whole bunch of, nobody is playing at 100%. Everybody is playing with something. So it kind of comes with the territory. A more significant injury, though, which a nagging injury could turn into something more significant, or you could just have a significant injury. Like last year, Yanni Gourde broke his hand. Wasn't he broke his hand? He had an injury in the game one. I mean, he was fine going into the playoffs. Then something happened. He hurt himself in game one and had to play affected by that injury the rest of the series. So I think that is something that can just happen for both teams. And both teams are going to have to learn or, get accustomed to playing not necessarily at 100%. The Dobson question is one probably better suited for a Canadiens expert, except that you're taking the number one shot blocker in the NHL off your team on the number one shot blocking team in the NHL. And while Hudson plays a lot, from what I have seen, Marty St. Louis liked, and I'm using past tense because Dobson's not available in the series, if the report is reevaluated in 2 weeks, is truthful, he is not going to play in the series. So Marty liked to use Dobson and Matheson as his shutdown pair, and he does not have that as an option. So somebody is going to have to slot in for Dobson, who is not Noah Dobson. That doesn't mean that player can't do a good job, but Dobson earned that spot.
Sure.
Right? So it's a loss, but we've said just like the loss of Holmberg is a loss for the Lightning.
The Lightning are going to have to be playing a decent amount in Montreal's end. I do. I think if the Lightning are turning the puck over in the neutral zone, fueling the Habs' offensive attack, particularly with their top guys, that's going to be a tough series. That's because the Lightning have struggled defending in their own zone. We know that. We've talked about that. They got to play with the puck, and they've got to be responsible. So,
well, that would be how the Lightning want to script it. But sometimes games don't go according to plan.
No.
You have to adjust.
And the other team obviously has a say in that. And so I think Montreal is going to look to push play and make the Lightning uncomfortable. And if they can make this a series where the Lightning have to defend more than dictating play, stating the obvious there, that might be an advantage for Montreal because of what they have. up front. But time will tell. We invite everybody to listen to the show. Please, noon to 1 every day. We're going to be here taking your questions. We do not discriminate. We love you all as long as you keep it clean.
We try and give a fair and honest, as we've said, a fair and honest assessment of what happens in each and every game.
Okay.
Good, bad, ugly, anywhere in between.
Kenneth said, per Marco D'Amico, game 1 at 6 p.m. That's just a rumor.
Leave it to the Canadiens reporter to get the scoop.
So, we do know it's Sunday.
Yeah,
we do know it's Sunday.
Keep your calendars open, Lightning fans, for Sunday. At some point, game 1 will take place.
It will. All right. Partner, great job. We want to look
talk to you tomorrow. We'll do a pre-tape tomorrow.
Pre-tape tomorrow. Thanks to all of you for listening. We appreciate it. Thanks to Steve Ersnick for producing. I am Greg Linnelli. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.